What's going on, guys, and welcome to another Boosted Films video. In this video we're going to take a look at changing the stock OEM oil cooler lines on a Mitsubishi EVO 8 or EVO 9. And full disclosure here, if I had to do this all over again, if I was buying a roller that didn't have any oil cooler at all, I would most likely not buy a OEM unit. I would actually just buy an aftermarket unit that comes with new lines and everything. It would just kind of be cheaper and easier to do this. I bought the OEM oil cooler that's on my car for a decent price, but by the time you kind of add in the fact now that I've replaced these lines at about 85 bucks per line, it's kind of expensive, and I could have upgraded to a different oil cooler by now. But if you want to keep things OEM, hopefully you'll find this valuable, or if you just want a video to reference to see what the OEM lines look like, hopefully this will be helpful to you. And if you're looking for OEM part numbers for these two oil lines and also the gaskets for the bolts that hold these oil lines in place, just check the video description and I'll include the OEM part numbers in there. And that's about it for this introduction, and now we'll get into the video. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do here is simply pop our hood and then remove our front bumper. And you'll have to remove an under tray as well if you happen to have an under tray. I have a separate how-to video on removing the front bumper. If you need to reference that, please see the video description. And the next step is going to remove the passenger side wheel. I know I'm showing the driver's side wheel here, but I'm working in tight quarters, and this is just the wheel I showed removing. So you're going to want to remove the passenger side wheel for this job, and then you're going to want to set your car in jack stands as well. And of course, if you feel like you've seen this video footage before, it's probably because I've done a lot of videos at once while I was working on dropping the transmissions. That's part of what some of this video is from, but it still covers the same details. And again, because I was removing my transmission, I did remove a lot of extra parts here that you will not have to remove. So you will not have to remove your lower control arm or your spindle or your CV shaft or any of that stuff. But I'm just showing this here so you can see why all this stuff is out of the way in the video I'm making. But here we are. Now I am showing you these oil cooler lines that need to be replaced on my car because of lovely salt on the roads eating away and making them rusty and crappy and not very trustworthy. So there is a feed line and a return line basically running from your oil filter to your oil cooler. And here's just the front view of our oil cooler and the oil lines. Yours might look a little different after you pulled the front bumper off because you might have a fender liner in there as well. And here are the new lines we're going to put in. Part numbers I will put in the video description as well if you're looking to buy these parts yourself. So you're going to need the two lines, and then you can get basically up to 8 of these gaskets if you would like. So just having 4 of these new OEM gaskets that go around the bolts that hold the lines in place did end up working okay for me. But if you had nothing to start with, you would need to buy 8 of them, because as far as I can tell, there is a gasket on each and every bolt. There are 4 bolts, but then there are 2 gaskets on each bolt. So of course, basically what you're going to do with this project is change your oil while you're doing this. It is a great time to do an oil change. So you're going to want to drain the oil out of your oil pan, and then you're going to want to remove your oil filter. I like to clean things up as best I can while I am able to do it. So I did a little bit of cleaning while I was working on these lines. And these bolts are rather big bolts, so you will need a 24mm wrench or socket to get to some of these bolts. A wrench may work better for some of these that are a little bit harder to get to. But even though they are rather large bolts, they shouldn't be torqued too tight, so they shouldn't be just too hard to break loose. So we're taking out this first bolt here, and you can see how that looks. And then we're going to pull off the oil line that goes to the oil filter housing. Next, we're going to move back to the front of the car, and as you can see the oil cooler here, I'm going to remove the other end of that line, basically the top bolt that holds that oil cooler line in place. I'm going to break that free with my wrench, and then I'm able to spin it free the rest of the way by hand. And again, you'll be able to note that there is a gasket on each side basically of that line. So there's a gasket between where the bolt goes on the line and another gasket between where the line bolts onto either the housing, the oil filter housing, or to the actual oil cooler itself. Out with the old, in with the new. Just a quick side-by-side shot comparing the two lines. And next what I'm going to do is remove that lower line that's bolted to the oil cooler. It's going to be easier to remove this line now with the top line out of the way. So before I reinstall that other line, I'm going to remove this one from the oil cooler. So once we have removed those lines from the oil cooler, we can get our new ones ready to install. We're obviously going to want to clean up those bolts that we took out, brake clean them a little bit, get any oil off of them, and then get our new gaskets in place. And these two oil lines may look very similar, but they are specific. And this first line we're installing here with the 90-degree bend basically is the return line, and this is the line that bolts onto the bottom of the oil cooler. So we're going to put that line up in place and bolt it in. All of these oil cooler lines have, I guess, kind of a guide pin basically to line them up so they go right in place as they should. That guide pin fits in a little bit loose, just so you're aware, but these should really kind of only go on one way. So we're going to tighten up that bolt on that return line going to the oil cooler. And next we're going to go to the oil feed line. This is the line that feeds the oil from the oil filter housing into the oil cooler. And we're just going to bolt that in place as well. Next, we're going to go back under the car and I'm going to give you a look at the oil filter housing itself. Yours should look similar to this. You may notice that mine has a weird kind of bolt sticking out of it. I believe someone had an aftermarket oil pressure gauge and ran some sort of oil source from here. It does look kind of ugly. I was trying to remove it, but it seemed like very tight in there. I'm not sure what someone did. It also had some kind of seal or stuff around it where maybe it was leaking. So I didn't want to really test my luck with breaking that, like actually breaking it. Just telling you here, you know, we all have issues like this on cars sometimes. I decided it wasn't worth my trouble. It was really, if it isn't broke, don't fix it kind of thing. So I left that ugly looking piece alone. So next we're going to remove the final bolt holding our oil line on here. And again, I like to clean up the area a little bit while I can. Spray some brake clean around and just kind of wipe up any excess oil or anything else that's dirty around there. Get it nice and clean before we install these shiny new lines. So obviously you've seen this before, and we're going to bolt this oil return line in place here. And tighten it up. And finally, the last piece of the puzzle here, we're going to put that feed line to the oil filter housing, and we're going to bolt that in place as well. I know some of this isn't the most complicated stuff. I really just like to document everything I'm doing, so if you needed a reference point on your EVO that you could kind of go back and say, oh, okay, that's what that looks like. That's another part of the reason I'm documenting all this, other than hopefully helping you out when it does come to specifically doing the project itself. So next we're going to go ahead and put a little bit of oil in our oil filter, and then I usually like to take a little bit of that new oil and put it on the gasket itself, the gasket of the oil filter. You also want to check and make sure when you remove your old oil filter that the gasket from the oil filter didn't stick to the oil filter housing or anything like that. That could certainly cause a disaster. It's another reason to really just check things over before you're putting things back together. So that's about it. Now we're going to put our oil filter back onto our oil filter housing, and then you should be able to, obviously, don't forget, you want to add some oil to your engine, put your engine oil back in, and then you should be able to reassemble whatever you had to take off your car. So most likely you'll be putting your wheel back on, and you'll be maybe putting your fender liner back in, maybe an under tray, and your front bumper, you'll put that back in place. And here's a look at our final product, putting on those shiny new lines. I probably mentioned this in the introductory video, but these are expensive pieces and you may be better off buying a whole new oil cooler depending on your situation. Maybe if someone ends up wanting to sponsor me an aftermarket oil cooler, I can make a video on installing an aftermarket one. But for now, this is just replacing the lines. These lines were about $85 each on Amazon the time I purchased them. These are OEM lines. And now is probably a good time to state, if you did happen to have an engine failure or something where a lot of metal was running through your oil system in your car and it went through your oil cooler, it is very hard, if not near impossible, to clean out these oil coolers. It's not really worth it to try and clean out an oil cooler if you know it had a lot of metal debris kind of running through it. So basically, if you are looking at this video because you want to clean your oil cooler or anything like that, because you blew up your engine, I would recommend just getting a new oil cooler. Probably not a new OEM one because of the price. There are a couple of decent options for EVOs in the aftermarket world that you can look into. So as always, if I did anything wrong or if you found a better way to do it, please leave a comment in the comment section and let me know. Check the comment section for people that are smarter than me, that know how to do this better than me, but didn't make a video for some reason. And also check the video description. If I did have any updates to this, that's where the updates will be shown. And I will also link to other helpful how-to videos in that video description as well. So as always, this is Paul from Boosted Films, and thanks so much for watching.